Hey everyone, and welcome back to my channel. Today I wanted to start a new reading vlog, and I gotta be honest, I'm doing so many themed reading vlogs right now that it is ridiculous. But I hope that all of them will see the light of day eventually. But this one is gonna be very fun because I want to read non-fiction books about disability, because I always feel like this is a kind of category of books that I don't read enough about. I don't read a lot of nonfiction anyway, but nonfiction about disability so far has played a completely minor role in this, and I want to change that. So I have chosen 3 books that I want to read and talk to you about, and I'm gonna start with kind of the groundwork book, I guess, and that is Disability Visibility by Alice Wong. This is an essay collection that collects tons and tons of diverse voices that talk about how they perceive their disability, how they live with their disability, which struggles they face, what joys they have, everything. It's really such a diverse collection, and I think that is very interesting. So I will talk about that in a second. But then I have 2 other books, and those are memoirs that I want to listen to. The first one is called Sitting Pretty, and this is by Rebekah Taussig. I don't know, how would you say that in English? But yeah, this is a memoir that I have had my eye on for a while now, and I think it sounds very intriguing. And then I have another one that I think complements that really well, and that one is The Pretty One by Keah. And this author actually has an essay in here talking about her writing her book, so that is even more fun kind of to have that connection. And so these are the 3 books I want to talk about in this video, so if you're interested, please keep watching. So I'm currently halfway into Disability Visibility, and so I thought this would be a good point to talk about it. And the idea is that I will always update you about these books at the halfway point, and when I finished it, to give you a more nuanced experience kind of. So this one is an essay collection, and we have quite a few essays in here. So I haven't counted them, but they are separated into 4 parts, and I'm right now in the middle of the second part, so I have 1 essay left in the second part, so I should have probably read that and then done the update, but oh well. So the first part is talking about being. So in this first part we have a lot of essays that reflect on just being disabled and how that works in the world we live in, what struggles there are, but also just trying to diversify the view, I guess, by adding a lot of different voices, different disabilities, but also just different intersectionality into this topic. And there were a couple of essays that I really enjoyed. So we have the first one, which is called Unspeakable Conversations, which is a text that was written in the early 2000s by a disabled woman who kind of talked with one philosopher who basically wanted to introduce the option for parents to kill their disabled babies because he thought that would be fair. And so she was debating that with him, and she talks about kind of how hard that is and how hard it is that he was coming from this kind of intellectual, philosophical point of view, and so you can't simply say he's an evil person because he wants to kill people, but obviously that is what is behind all of those intellectual and philosophical thoughts. So I thought that was very interesting. Then we have a very short one called If You Can't Fast Give, that talks about Ramadan and fasting and how hard it can be to not be physically able to fast if this is part of your religion and your beliefs. Then we have one that is called There's a Mathematical Equation That Proves I'm Ugly, talking about perceptions of beauty in the society and how, yeah, especially children can be so quick with their judgments, just telling someone you're ugly, like... Then we have the erasure of indigenous people and chronic illness, which I thought was very interesting. This one was very angry, but I think definitely called for. So yeah, that was really good. There were some talking about the idea of a cure or healing, especially in the context of religion, which I thought was very interesting. Then we have one, the isolation of being deaf in prison, which was very harrowing, just the experience of a deaf man in prison and how he was so isolated throughout so many like life-changing, very traumatic events, and he couldn't really talk to anyone about it. So yeah, those were a couple that I thought were really great. And then in the becoming part, the part 2, as I said, I have one more left to read. This one is kind of stupid, but this one goes more into a direction of acceptance, self-acceptance, but also fighting for more visibility for people with disabilities, and coming out of that spot that is reserved for disabled people in our communities and in our societies, and kind of fighting that, I guess. And so I really enjoyed a lot of the essays in this one as well. So for example, the first one, We Can't Go Back, was one that talked about people who have to live in institutions and how damaging that can be, that there is no room to grow and to learn in institutions like that, and that they're just there for the people to survive but not to live lives. And I thought that was great. There was one about clothing, especially clothing in like also underwear sense, and I liked that one, but it was very long. Like that could have been edited down a little bit, but it was very interesting. Then we have one about guide dogs for blind people, how there is this perception that these are people who are just led by those dogs, which obviously is stupid. Like the dog is not the one who is determining where to go, basically. There is one talking about a person who worked in a hospital and then had to be a patient there herself, and kind of like she says, taking charge of my story as a cancer patient at the hospital where I work. So it was a lot about taking the narrative, and I really like that. Then there is one that talks about the kind of East Asian view on disability and kind of like how that is changing, but that some of the immigrants from these countries have left those before the perceptions started to change, so they still might have the like old perceptions on disability. As I said, there is the essay by Keah Brown, Nurturing Black Disabled Joy, which obviously is about joy and how a lot of the perceptions are that disabled people don't experience joy. They can't experience joy because of their disability, which is ridiculous. We have an essay about asexuality, which I thought was very great to see that, because in the book Ace by Angela Chen, we also have this kind of intersection of asexuality and disability, and how a lot of people think that disabled people are all asexual, that they can't experience sexual arousal. So I thought it was really great to have an essay about that in here as well. There is one about parenthood and disability, which I thought was great. It's called Imposter Syndrome and Parenting with a Disability. That one was really good. I would say most of these have been very intriguing, very well written, very good ideas, and a wonderful selection of things to talk about when it comes to disability. So far, really good. And now I will read the rest. So I have now finished reading Disability Visibility, and I wanted to give you my final thoughts. Now overall I really enjoyed this book. I gave it 4.5 stars, and I think that this is a great kind of introduction into this topic. At the same time, I think it is useful if you have thought about some things about disability before. But this book is such a great collection of essays because it is very diverse. It touches on so many different topics, on so many different like intersectionality. Is that how you call it? I always get confused with the English word for some reason, but you know what I'm talking about. So yeah, this book is doing a great job at that, at collecting diverse, important and interesting voices. And also, if you look at the back, for one, you have an extensive like reading list where you can dive into topics further. And then also you can see where some of these essays and just overall like texts were published before. So not all of it is original to this book, but so it is just a great collection of things to bring them together under this umbrella. So I really enjoyed this, and I would definitely recommend. My critique kind of is that while I did learn some new things factually from this book, or maybe like some things I hadn't thought about before, I didn't feel like it changed my perspective in a fundamental way or anything like that. So yeah, it's just a really, really good book that I would recommend reading. Now, I had stopped talking about this with the second part, so now I read the third and the fourth part, and I just wanted to quickly go into that. So the third part is called Doing, and in this one it is a lot about like actual taking action in certain areas. So we have one essay that talks about writing a novel when you have some kind of like injury to the brain, and how two people with a similar injury but like different consequences because of that came together to finish the novel. And then we have another piece about abortion laws, and in this one it takes more of the stand that access to abortion is important, especially also for people with disabilities, and that banning abortions is bad for the community as well, because a lot of like pro-life, which I don't like that term, for me that's anti-choice people, they will argue with children with disabilities as a reason to ban abortions. And this essay talked about the hypocrisy of these people, because they usually don't invest in the lives of people with disabilities. And so yeah, I really like that one. That's something I feel very strongly about as well, because it is a very difficult and nuanced topic, and I really like that essay. But there's others. There's one about astronomy and how we can make sciences a more open and diverse field, but that that is not only great for people who can then enter, but also the scientific system would definitely improve because of that, and new kind of findings would be possible and stuff like that. That one was a TED Talk, and so I watched the TED Talk, and I think watching it was better than reading the script, kind of, but still a very interesting piece. There was one about incontinence, which I had never actually thought about, and that's like pretty much one of the points that is made in the essay, so I thought that was really great. There's one about the Nanette show by Hannah Gadsby, and how it talks about this idea that creators have to suffer for their art, and how that is actually very painful and very dangerous to think that way. And so it is like critiquing that idea. There is one about time, which I really enjoyed. The perspective on time and how time works differently for people with disabilities was really fascinating. And there was one about public transport for people with disabilities in New York City. That one, I think, should have had a content warning, and it did not. I found this one to be one of the most harrowing essays because it describes one incident of like, it's not really assault, I guess, but of a boundary crossing that it's just horrible. So that one definitely deserves a content warning, I think. And then part 4, connecting, is obviously about coming together and activism and how that all works. So there is one about Benjamin Lay, which was an abolitionist that I had never heard about because I'm rubbish with British history, but it was very interesting. And just the argument that when we have like historical figures with disabilities, that oftentimes those disabilities are left out of the conversations, and that should not happen. We have one about the climate catastrophe, and that it usually hits people with disabilities way more than other people, and also queer people more than other people, and that what we can learn from the activism around that as a society. There is one piece about the Black Lives Matter movement and how they did not include people with disabilities in their texts and their proclamations. Then there is one about love, which I found very touching. I'm not like a romancy person, but that one was very lovely. There is one about the idea of ancestors that I really enjoyed. I thought that was such an interesting perspective on ancestry and what that means for us today, and this perspective that not only we learn from our ancestors, but our ancestors can still also learn through us. That was really great. I really enjoyed that one. And the last one is about spaces that are created especially or only for people with disabilities in mind. And that one I really enjoyed as well. It was just a very interesting perspective and very well written. I really liked the way it was phrased as well. It was really great. I learned a lot and I really enjoyed it, and I hope you give it a try. And I will come back when I read one of the 2 memoirs. So I'm now halfway through my audiobook for Sitting Pretty by Rebekah Taussig, and I am really enjoying this book. In this one, we are basically reading the memoir of the author. She's a young woman who uses a wheelchair, and we also get some insights into, or some basics, I would say, from disability studies. And I think that the way these topics are interconnected is done really well, because you can on the one hand see these individual experiences of the author, but on the other hand you also get presented some information for the overarching problem, the overarching consequences, and also correlates of ableism. And so I think this combination works super well for me, because it's not just about one single life, even though it is an important life and I always like reading about other people's lives, but it brings in that context variable as well, and discussing, you know, definitions of ableism, discussing some stats about how people with disability are disadvantaged in the US predominantly, but obviously in many other countries as well. So a lot of what she is talking about in this book you could transfer really well to the German system as well, because it works very similarly. And so I really like that, getting these 2 things combined. I think because we have the personal experience, it makes it easier to grasp and understand, but then also it is not lacking the context information that really makes this an impactful read. So I'm very confident that I will rate this very, very highly when I'm finished with it. Now, in this book, we have different chapters, and the different chapters all tackle different topics. So we're not going chronologically in her life story, but we're looking at different things. So for example, in the first chapter, it is about why she even wrote the book, what she wants to achieve with it. And then we also get a chapter, for example, on dating. We get a chapter that focuses on a teaching experience that she had, which relates to just how entrenched we are in ableist ideology every day. And there is a chapter that focuses a lot on healthcare. So I think that doing it by these themes again works really well to portray that this is not just an individual's life's story, but we get kind of the context variables, and then we see how they impacted this particular life as well. So I'm really, really liking it. There were a lot of moments where I really had to manage my anger because of how people reacted to our protagonist and author. So this is definitely a read that I have to be a little bit careful about, and imagining that these are the life experiences, the everyday life experiences of a person makes me so enraged. And I'm really liking this book. I think you should pick it up, and I'll let you know my final thoughts once I finished it. So last night I finished reading Sitting Pretty by Rebekah Taussig, and I absolutely love this book. I gave it 5 stars. I think everyone should go and read it. It was so good. I loved the way it combined the memoir with the more scientific disability studies points. It was just woven together so seamlessly. And it was just great. It was really great. The ending also made me cry a little bit. It does end with some happy and some sad news about her life. And so, yeah, it was just really great. I don't really know what else to say that I haven't said already about the book, but it's just one that I definitely will keep on my Audible ready to reread whenever I feel like it. I wish that we would have gotten a little PDF with the audiobook where all the further reading recommendations would be in, because that's very hard to scribble down while you're listening to the audiobook. But apart from that, I would highly recommend this book. It was so great, and I just appreciate her taking the time to write this, because she mentions multiple times how that was just not an easy task, and I can totally see why, but I think she did a phenomenal job, and I hope even more people are going to read this. I mean, it is quite successful already, but can we make this more successful? I hope so. Please pick this book up if you're interested. It covers so many important topics. The later chapters also talk about feminism and disabled bodies, as well as the big theme of accessibility and what that means and how it is viewed by non-disabled people, and how that is just skewed. It's just a very skewed view, and all the things we don't understand about this. And it was great. The anecdotes were chosen perfectly, and I loved it. I'm just gonna leave it at that. Just read the book. Read the book. You don't need me to tell you anything about it, because you can go right now and read it. So I'm now halfway into my last book for this reading vlog, The Pretty One by Keah Brown. Now, before I go into my thoughts on the first half of the book, I wanted to quickly mention that she has a new book out this year, which is a YA queer romance with a main character who has cerebral palsy. So I just wanted to mention that quickly because maybe you don't really love nonfiction, so that might be a fiction choice you could be interested in. Now, Keah Brown is a young black woman who has cerebral palsy, and she talks about all of her identities in this book called The Pretty One. The name of the book is very interesting because this is the term that her twin sister was always referred to with, because she does not have a physical disability. And so in this book, while the author talks about a lot of different topics, a lot of it has to do with popular media and also advertising, the lack of representation of disabled black people in these media things. She also talks very honestly about her family relationships, especially to her twin sister, because growing up she always had this kind of mirror with her twin sister of a life she could have had if she did not have the physical disability. And she talks about the jealousy that she experienced because of that, and that really threatened and hurt the relationship that she has with her twin sister. And I think that is so interesting because it is a very, very unique perspective to be a disabled black woman and then also have a twin sister who's an identical twin but does not have the physical disability. And so I really enjoy listening to this audiobook. It is narrated by the author herself, which is always very nice with nonfiction books. It just really feels like the person telling you about their life, which is just something that I really like and I can really appreciate. So I'm having a great time with this book. Now, I said that this one also focuses a lot on like pop culture, which is not necessarily something that I'm like very familiar with. I feel like I have missed out on a lot of like the popular shows when I was a teenager and also later in my life. So for example, I have watched the OC, but like a lot of the other shows that were on for teenagers around the same time I have not watched. But still, I think that talking about the lack of representation for black people, for disabled people in these shows is very important. And even if you're not like a connoisseur of pop culture like the author is, you can still really appreciate this message and really see how it is true, like how we are lacking this representation. It also talks about dangerous representation, as we have seen in Me Before You, which is a movie I really did not like at all. Yeah, it's very interesting. There was also like, I think that is actually the first essay in this book is about chairs and seating, and about how having public like seating in different areas can be so important, especially for people who have physical disabilities but do not use a wheelchair, as the author doesn't do. And that was a day where I had a migraine and I went out to buy a couple of things from the stores, and while I listened to this essay I was waiting for the bus, and I was like so thankful for the seats. There were exactly 2 seats for people waiting for the bus, and luckily they were free because I felt really poorly because of the migraine. So it was such an interesting experience listening to her like praising seats and chairs when I had such a deep need for one at that exact moment. So yeah, I just really enjoyed this book so far. I think that while it is deeply personal in some aspects, it is also very relatable with all of the like pop culture references, and we are pretty much the same age. I think she was born a year before me, so a lot of like the pop culture references translate really well to my experience as well. And I'm really excited to listen to the rest of this book, and I'll definitely let you know how it goes. So we did it. We have come to the end of this vlog because I just finished reading The Pretty One by Keah Brown. So we can wrap up this final book and then wrap up the vlog as a whole. I really liked this book. I must say that even though not all of the topics were like good for me, I'm not quite the target audience, I still had a lot in this book that I could relate to or that was just very interesting to hear about. Now, I'm giving it 4.5 stars just because, as I just said, I'm not quite the target audience. I expected a little bit more from it, I guess, but this is really just Keah Brown kind of reflecting on her earlier life. I think she wrote this when she was in her 20s, so just thinking about her teenage years and her college years and things that have happened and how she came to accept her body and herself and to start to love herself. And so I think this is very powerful, especially if you are in that age range where you're still figuring things out about yourself, I guess. And so I guess I don't want to say I'm a little bit too old for that because that's like stupid, but I think it would have been even more impactful if I've read it a couple of years ago. Now, also one thing that I wasn't a big fan of is that the like pop cultural things that were mentioned are not the kind of things that I'm into. So sometimes I was just lacking the connection there. I'm not a big fan of rom-coms. I don't really have any idea about them, to be honest. I haven't watched a lot of like American TV when I grew up. I was much more of an anime girl, so a lot of like the shows that are mentioned I have never heard of or have never watched. And then also with the music she's listening to, I have very different music taste. And with the books and authors she has mentioned, I have read one Toni Morrison. She talks about Beloved, and then she also talks about Sarah Dessen, which is really not an author I'm at all familiar with. So that was just the kind of like disconnect, that a lot of the like references or things where she's drawing parallels to these pop culture things, they were not lost on me, but just not as effective as I think they are if you grew up in a similar way, if that makes sense. So I think that because this was so focused on the pop culture, it just wasn't that transferable, I guess, to people who grew up differently. But it can be like super cool for people who grew up with the same shows and the same movies and the same books. So it is a positive and a negative, I guess, depending on who you are as a reader. But apart from that, I absolutely loved it. The author also talks a lot about depression and thoughts of suicide, so this might be triggering for you. Make sure you're okay with that if you start reading the book. But I found it to be more relatable because a lot of the things she talks about I have experienced in similar or different ways, but I could definitely see the parallels there. And so she also talks a lot about just finding the joy and the happiness, or at least go look for it, as kind of the antidote to her depression. And so yeah, I overall, I really liked it. I think also the audiobook, which the author narrates herself, was very well done. I really enjoyed listening to her voice. I have read in some Goodreads reviews that it was too repetitive for those readers. I didn't really mind that because just listening to the audiobook, it felt like just a friend telling you about her life and some thoughts she has and some introspection. And I don't go into memoirs always expecting to learn something for my own life, like that I can apply to my own life. I think sometimes it's just interesting to hear about the experiences of other people. So I didn't have that issue, but I just wanted to mention it because definitely there is some repetition and there is themes that come up again and again and again, but I just didn't mind that because I was listening to this as if like a friend was just speaking to me. And so I didn't care. So take that as you will. I would recommend all of these books that I have talked about in this video. Now, if I would have to do a ranking, I think on number 3 would be The Pretty One by Keah Brown, just because of the things I just talked about. On number 2, I would put Disability Visibility, that was edited by Alice Wong. And then on number 1, I would put Sitting Pretty by Rebekah Taussig. Because with this last one, I think if you're just starting to get into non-fiction books about disability, I think this first, Rebekah Taussig's book is just a great place to start, because she talks about her own experiences, but she also talks about disability studies and just things that research has found out about these topics. And I think mixing the two together just worked so well for me. So it was definitely my favorite of these 3 books. But if you have even an inkling of interest in disability and how life with disability is and how different it also can be, I would absolutely recommend you read all 3 of these books. There was really not a dud in this little selection of books. I am so happy that I read these, and I will definitely continue on reading more. I'm actually already planning a part 2 of this video because Alice Wong edited another volume. I just forgot what it's called. It's also something with disability that is kind of like similar to Disability Visibility. And I think this book just came out, so I definitely want to get that, and at the latest next year start the part 2 of this reading vlog. So I really hope that this vlog kind of inspired you to pick these books up, to learn more about the life experiences of other people, especially if you do not have a physical disability or any disability or chronic illness yourself. So let me know if you have now been inspired to pick up any of these books, and also if you have recommendations on other memoirs or non-fiction books written by people with disabilities. I would love to hear about that. And I thank you so much for watching, and I'll talk to you soon. Bye!